Hello and welcome to Radio Writeoff. I'm called Scratch.
I'm not a hat.
I'm Dub's Rewatcher.
Who is joining us today as our special guest, which is great. We have changed up our organizational stuff here a little at Radio Write-Off, and streamlined adding special guests, which is good. So hopefully we'll have more people joining us in the future.
Special guest. I'm one of the damn original members of the show.
He has a point there.
It's true. We have to get Zoe in on the next one, maybe on an art one, because she's actually someone who draws things, I think. So, Speaking of art, that is one of the differences we have this round. We have an art round to talk about. So what did you guys think of that?
I loved it. I thought the art this round was fantastic.
I have no idea whether the art this round was fantastic because we've never had anything to compare it to.
You haven't even... Oh.
That's true, actually. I was kind of wondering what it would turn out like. It does seem like there were some very nice pieces put in, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. Maybe it'll get even better.
In all seriousness, I did really like the art. Like, just generally having an art round was really cool. But the art itself was a lot better than I was expecting, and just on average, and I really enjoyed it. I thought they were fun to look at.
Hayes was the star of this round, which I am not surprised about.
Yeah, he really swept the medals here. I mean, who was it? Groninger Agony came in, got the bronze at like 6th place or something.
Yeah.
That might be a record for lowest placing bronze medal.
5th place. But yeah, Hayes took 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. So congratulations, Hayes, and good job, GGA and Filler as well, who took 1st with his very understated piece, which I liked a lot.
Yeah, Hayes drew LO Governor, Clang, and Pyrotechnics, which were, in my opinion, the 3 best pieces of the contest.
Yeah, I feel like I voted a little differently. I would have liked some of the ones with a little bit more, like, I don't know, story suggested to them. But it's hard to tell, I guess, what people like, what people are interested in. I might just be weird. I'm generally oftentimes a little out.
Well, we knew that.
Yeah. So that's good. I'm glad you know me. So, art write-off. Anything else to say about that?
What we would normally do at this point in the podcast is generally talk about the prompt for this round, but obviously the prompt this round is the art. Rising from the Ashes has been interpreted in an awful lot of ways by these artists, and as a result we've had a pretty interesting spread of stories compared to normal. Anyway.
Yeah, that is interesting. I have not read as many stories this round as I oftentimes do. So I can't talk about like general trends or anything, I guess.
I can.
Sweet. Do you have anything to say about the general trends this round, Dubs?
Yeah, something I realized this morning when I was reading over a whole bunch of ones that we're going to talk about is, there's a whole load of stories in this round that use talking to death or talking to someone who's dead as a trope. I've seen it in Ars Vivendi. I've seen it in the Hereafter, the Path. I've seen it in Color of the Stars, in a sense. And yet, very interestingly, none of those use mortality, that image, as a inspiration, which is interesting because I think that's the only one that explicitly has someone interacting with a dead character.
Yeah,
that is an interesting
I have to
point.
admit, on most of the stories I've read, I've ended up checking the pics and being like, wait, mortality wasn't on this? I genuinely thought it was when I started reading, so very strange. Very strange. But that's probably because I almost wrote a fic for mortality myself, so I sort of have had that on my mind the entire contest.
Did mortality get any?
I don't think it did.
Yeah, no, it didn't. Well, wait, who drew this? It was Zaid Valroa. Zaid Valroa, if you listen to this, know that I think your piece inspired a whole bunch of these, but people just don't want to admit it.
Interesting. Well, I wonder how much the art prompt, like the Rising from the Ashes, I wonder how much of that affected what people wrote too, you know?
Yeah.
Because sure, it's a step back from these stories, but I feel like people might have images. It's a step back from the images, but I think people might have used both of them to some extent.
I got to think at least one person just straight up ignored the art and went straight for the Rising for the Ashes prompt.
It's possible. It's possible. Several of these, after reading them, I could actually point to how they were incorporating the image fairly clearly,
Yeah.
Which was interesting. So, yeah. But Clang, ours Vivendi only has Clang. You're right. That's interesting.
Yep.
So, okay. Well, shall we talk about some stories?
Well, I also do want to say, as a note of gratitude, I'm very happy that I haven't really seen anyone yet complaining that a story isn't related to the art.
Oh,
Because
yes.
I was so expecting that, considering how many times we have people, I don't want to say the crying because that has a bad connotation, complaining about how stories aren't related to the prompt. I was expecting a lot more people to be up in arms about relating to something as concrete as the art.
That said, we did have an awful lot of the art isn't related to the prompt comments.
Yeah.
Which
people are allowed to do. I mean,
I think it is a lot harder to spot that connection with art than it is with fics to prompts, because people go off.
I'm not sure I agree, but I see your point.
Yeah. I mean, I think people are allowed to say what they want, and they should vote however they feel like, because that is, I think, one of the kind of cornerstones of the write-off is you should be doing what you should be interpreting it yourself, But I don't know. I guess it's not a bit too big a deal either way, because, yeah. So, should we talk about some stories?
Yes, I
Sure.
suppose we should.
All right. I believe our order starts with Hereafter, and this time we've decided to split up into pairs, partially because I think having 3 people all talk about one story tends to make it take longer. And if we've got 5 stories, we want to do this in like about an hour. That might be a little tricky, but also because it helps us possibly focus a little more. So, Hereafter with Quill and Dubs, go.
Oh no, Hat, don't leave me alone with them.
I'm going to mute my mic, as a matter of fact. So.
Fair enough. All right then.
So Quill, what did you think about Granny Smith dying?
Okay, so a lot of people talking in the comments about crying and emotions and reactions to this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start this by pointing out it is not difficult to make me cry. I cry at a lot of things. I will cry at like every Disney movie ever. I'll cry within like 10 minutes of Lilo and Stitch. So it's not hard to make me cry.
On the opposite, it is very hard to make me cry. I can think of I can't think of any story I read that's ever made me cry, excluding the Bible, but that's me. I can think of movies. I mean, Inside Out has made me cry every single time I've seen it.
Oh, goodness, yes.
But yeah, stories don't make me cry. And I have to say, if I ever found a ponyfic that managed to make me cry, that thing would be going on top of my slate for the next year. Just because if something is good enough that it makes me have that intense an emotional reaction, it's a whopper.
Mm. So basically, I think what we've just established is that we are the 2 basic benchmarks for emotional reaction to fics. If you can break me, you've done a job, and if you can break Dubs, you've done an amazing job.
Yeah.
This story did not emotionally affect me very much.
Yeah.
That's what that entire thing was building up to. It didn't affect me that much, which is not necessarily off to a good start. Then again, it did affect some other people. That's a good sign. It might just mean I'm not really part of the audience here. But yeah, I did not find this particularly sad. I actually found this quite nice in a way. It was...
Yeah.
If there were any feelings I got from this, apart from the final line, which I have a feeling we'll both be talking about,
Yeah.
apart from the final line, it was generally happy feelings from that scene break onwards. It was heartwarming, in a way, to be given that
Yeah.
opportunity to speak with a dying character.
Yeah, I thought it was very sweet. I mean, the first scene with Applejack, Big Mac, and Apple Bloom all in the hospital, that's a little bit. I mean, that's kind of riding on the depression, the sadness. But after that, I think it mostly kind of gets away from the sort of sadness and more goes into that sort of sense of, nostalgia, happy memories.
Agreed. It's an interesting balance, actually. You go from that sadness and that grief to that. I mean, in some ways, it's kind of like the stages of grief and the sort of going from grief to acceptance at the end of that stage.
Yeah.
There, you kind of got that going on here, and it's a very fluid transition, despite the hard scene break. Like, I didn't really notice the point where I stopped feeling, oh, this is going to be a sad story, and started thinking, oh, this is going to be a heartwarming story. It just sort of happened.
Yeah.
That was quite well done, actually.
And I think that Granny Smith and Applejack's dialogue in the dream is actually very, very well done. I think Granny Smith, you definitely get a sense of her, even in this point where she knows that she's going to die, she still has that stubbornness, but that stubbornness is still a sign of her absolute care and her absolute love for her family. She doesn't panic because that love for her family overpowers any sort of panic. She cares more about her responsibility than her own well-being in that moment.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is to see how she carries on being herself, and yet we get that description of the where is it? It's like the spark is gone from her eyes or something. I'm trying to find the exact quote.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, that's kind of just a classic dead people
But
thing.
I think it's not so much a dead person thing in this case as it is it's Granny Smith's changing perspective. She's gone from being happy for her own sake to now being, she's trying to keep up appearances for Applejack's sake. She's dying.
I see, yeah.
She's kind of okay with that, but obviously it's a sad thing. But she wants Applejack to remember her fondly.
Yeah, okay, I see what the line you're talking about. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So I genuinely thought that was really well dealt with, even though it didn't hit me emotionally as hard as it might have done. It was just nicely written and really good character piece. Up until that last
Personally,
line.
my favorite, well, I was going to say, first, before we get to
Yes.
that, personally, my favorite line or grouping of lines in the piece is the paragraph that begins with an old American dream, and Granny Smith goes on to talk about how she doesn't want Applejack to remain alone, and then she gives that line. So if you end up with that Pegasus, it looks like a Zap apple, or that fussy unicorn of yours, you can still have foals, which I think is both a wonderfully characteristic line. It's very funny, and also it has that fussy unicorn callback to the joke. I'd say maybe about 10 paragraphs earlier.
Yeah, that was probably that section there is probably the closest I came to the strong emotional reaction in this fic, but that's just
Yeah, I
because
agree.
shipping
Well,
feels.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I also, in terms of emotional reaction, I mean, it didn't make me cry, but I did like the segment where Apple Bloom was leaving and they were kind of making her leave, just because I can sort of relate to that. And so I liked that. I thought that was a realistic depiction of how sort of families have to operate in tragedy. I mean, the one thing I always think about whenever I think about tragedy like this is, do you know the blog Humans of New York?
Yeah.
One of my favorite, actually, I think probably my favorite, I think the most memorable thing I ever saw on that blog was Brandon Stanton, the guy who runs it, asked a man, what was the saddest day of your life, or the saddest moment of your life? And the man said, the day after my mom died, sitting down with my father and realizing we had to decide what we were going to get for lunch. It's that moment of, it seems like everything, it seems like something's happened that makes it seem like your world has ended, but deep down, even though you want to just curl up and grieve, you have to keep going on. Life doesn't end your life doesn't end when someone else's does. And so I thought that idea of Applejack is saying, you have to just go home because, you don't need to be here grieving. I thought that was a good sense of that.
Yeah, that does come across very well, actually. I like that. I like a lot about this. The more I read it, the more I like it, I'm finding.
I mean, that's the characteristic of a good story.
Yeah.
The more you analyze it, the more you like it.
Yeah. There are some stories to which that doesn't quite apply, and they're still good, but most stories.
Well, We don't talk about
Yeah,
those.
let's not. But yeah,
Anyway, so final
line. Oh goodness. I mean, I admit the final line was a little spoiled for me in that I'd read the comments before I started.
Yeah, I agree. I had read Fenton's.
Fenton,
I don't know. Is it too harsh to call it a rant?
no, I don't think so. I think that's a fair enough description. It's a long complaint. That seems synonymous with rant, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I'd read Fenton's comment as well.
I agree. It really is just sort of a. I mean, it's definitely a smack in the face. And I'm not sure. Like I feel like if you're going for the effect that you really do want the reader to end on like feeling sort of upset and sort of jarred out of their emotions, then it works on that level. But at the same time, I mean, just looking at it not logistically, but realistically, I don't think that works as an ending just because of how tonal a shift that is. It signals basically like it's going to be a whole nother story from that point on, but it just ends. So rather than feeling like tonal shift, it more just feels like kind of like what Fenton said, like an inconsistency or kind of a betrayal of your emotional tone.
Yeah, like structurally, what it seems to be going for is one of those endings where you're literally pulling the rug out from under the readers as they finish, which is a standard thing in some genres.
A cynical Feghoot.
Yeah, kind of a cynical Feghoot. But also, I mean, it's something similar I would do in, say, for example, a psychological horror short story.
Yeah.
Ending on a twist that completely, you know, that doesn't allow the reader to what's the word I'm looking for? To resolve it, because there is a lack of resolution here. What that question sets up a huge emotional storm for Applejack, and we don't get to see any resolution of that. We don't even get to see it begin. We just get to know that it's going to be there, and that kind of ending works in some genres. Like I say, that sort of thing would work in psychological horror, because that's going to leave the reader feeling unsettled.
Even in a horror piece, I mean, when you end it like that, while it does lead to, you know, a sense of unsettling or something like that, a sense of surprise. I feel like in that situation, it's a good sort of unsettling. It's like when you read a horror piece, you want to be scared, so you're going in and that's your goal. But when you're reading something like this and you end it unsettled, something like the Hereafter, you're unsettled, but in a way that doesn't lead you feeling like, oh, I enjoyed that story. It leaves you feeling like that was an ending I really didn't like. Yeah. And I'm going to go on a podcast and talk about how I didn't like it.
But on the other hand, I can't think of what I would change in a like quick fix kind of suggestion. Like the final line is very clearly, have to be a quick fix. Yeah, the final line is very clearly the point of the piece. Like you wouldn't include that last line if it wasn't. You wouldn't include that last line if it wasn't the purpose.
I guess I don't know. I mean, I guess the point of the piece in general, I guess, is that idea of. Well, I mean, I was going to say it's the point of the piece is, you know, what happens after you die. But is it even that? Because so much of the piece, so much of the emotional meat of the piece is just Granny Smith and Applejack talking about stuff that's going to happen in the present.
Yeah. But I think a lot of that is because the emotional weight of Granny Smith dying is taken a little off Applejack's shoulders by the idea of an afterlife. Like, they can focus on the present because of that belief.
Yeah. I don't know. So, I mean,
yeah.
I guess I can agree then that I guess this final line is quote unquote the point. I'm just not sure it's a good point.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much where I'm sitting. Like, I feel like this would be a perfectly good story if you had a completely different point and didn't use that final line.
Yeah, and I don't think it's the sort of. I mean, if the author does want to fix it, I don't know. This might be their goal in the first place. If they do want to fix it, then I feel like it's not the sort of thing that can take like an easy
No.
fix. Because I think the simplest way to do it, I mean, the simplest way to do it would just be to change the final line. But assuming you don't want to do that, next simplest would be to add stuff after it. Um, and what you want to add after it, I don't know, it might be something sort of like, Luna reveals all this shit to Applejack's. Oh, am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yeah, go on.
uh, she reveals all this stuff to Applejack.
We're rated teen, right? We're good. Yeah.
Yeah, we should be fine.
Yeah. Reveals all this stuff to Applejack, and Applejack now knows that there's no afterlife, but like she sort of has to hide it from Big Mac and Apple Bloom just because she doesn't want to crush them. That might be an interesting ending.
That might be an interesting, completely continued story. Like, that would take up
Completely different story.
at least
true.
this many words onwards on the end.
Hat, you're supposed to have your mic muted.
I have returned because I was going to say I feel like you guys could probably talk to each other for forever, which is great, but we should also move on at some point too.
Oh, yeah, that's also a thing. We should actually talk about other stories.
Pat, you're killing my mojo here.
Sorry, I have kind of set myself up as the person who moves the podcast along, which maybe is, I don't know.
No fun allowed.
Anyways,
Sombra goes to the optometrist. Go.
Okay,
all right.
I just want to say in conclusion,
Okay.
Hereafter, it's a good fic. I like a lot of the emotional stuff in it. Granny Smith is characterized amazingly well. Ending needs more. There, that's it summarized in 10 seconds.
There we go.
Yep, I think that's pretty good. Okay, Sombra goes to the optometrist. This one is Hat and Dubs. So how did you feel about this story, Dubs?
I didn't like this. The story was. I think the way I have to describe this is that it was very well written, but it didn't make me feel much.
Okay. I liked this one a lot, and part of that might be because this was actually written to my art, which I submitted anonymously. That was Crystallized was my art. So that was really cool. It was like, I submitted some art, someone wrote a story. I was like, yes! I mean...
There might be a conflict of interest here.
It's possible, but I still liked the story a lot. I thought the opening was really good. Like... I remember reading the opening and being like, wow, that's a really strong open. One of the things I appreciated about it as well was that it is the main character's arrogance who destroys them in the end. And it's the main character's arrogance in even multiple places, too. It's their arrogance of not dealing with crystals, the arrogance of not taking professors and students seriously. Like, it's in multiple ways. It's the main character's arrogance that destroys them. And I thought that was awesome. I thought it was really cool how they used the graphic with the crystals and tied it in with like the eye chart.
That was fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah, but there were some things that kind of bothered me about it too. There was 2 elements it mentions, and I don't know if it was ever important that there were 2. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess.
Uh-huh.
I mean, yeah. At the end, his blindness / craziness is only caused by the explosion of one crystal.
That's what it seemed like.
I mean, I guess part of the making it 2 is sort of to throw readers off the track. Like, as soon as you see like one crystal stuck in the mountain, you're like, oh my god, this one crystal is gonna cause everything because it's the MacGuffin.
It's true.
But when you get 2, you might think twice and be like, oh, 2 is such an odd number for like a MacGuffin. Maybe it's gonna come from something else.
Yeah, there were a couple other things like that as well, like the co-researcher having Sparkle in their name and the ruler being named Mori or something like that. It seemed like it was trying to tie in with other stuff, but I never felt like it was really clear on how it was tying in.
Well, the Sparkle thing, I actually didn't even think about that. So I'm not sure that if that was intentional. Then I agree with you that I'm not sure what exactly the point was. However, I didn't see anything from that. I thought it was just someone named their kid Sparkle because they're unicorn and their horn sparkles.
Could be.
As for Amore, I mean, I think that's more just kind of a period thing. Like, they're living in pre-Sombra Crystal Empire, so who's the ruler going to be before Sombra? It's going to be yada yada de Amore.
Possibly, yeah, but that ties in with Cadence, right? Whose full name is
I think
Cadenza de Amore or something.
Yeah, I agree, but isn't the ruler in the past? This might be comic canon,
It's
so
possible. If it is, I wouldn't really know it. But
Hayes would know.
That was a couple of those things, a couple things like that, where I felt like it was trying to tie into other stuff, and I just wasn't grasping the ties.
I see. Yeah.
So like some of those, I think it would be really cool if they were strengthened. Maybe like what happens to the second element could have something to do with like Nightmare Moon or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
If the author wanted to extend it, but yeah, I don't know. I thought a lot of the stuff done here was really good.
Yeah.
Um, as a nitpick, I kept getting tripped up by the Magister Magistra because it was the two professors,
Yeah.
and it's just like one letter difference. And that's because I'm not a very attentive reader. Like I will admit that to everyone all day. I just am easily tripped up by stuff like that.
So I thought that Sombra
Mhm.
was wonderfully characterized. I think it's kind of funny that his name was Sombra even before he went evil. It's like you name your kid Sombra, you're setting him up for some dark shit.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, I thought he was very well characterized. I thought it was an interesting blend of both. He's a normal pony, but he still has that sort of, like you said,
Hmm.
arrogance and that sort of anger behind
Yeah.
him that leads to his eventual, I guess we can call it a downfall.
Right.
Um, I thought that Sparkle Dust was so many writers when they do like OC supporting characters have a tendency to make them very very cardboard, very flat,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of like they're just there to move the plot forward.
Sure.
But I thought that Sparkle Dust had enough character on her own, being that sort of high strung, very fussy, but still caring in her own little way.
Hmm.
Um, that she stood out as a well-rounded character.
Yeah. Um, a lot of the details in here were really well done. And I think that's good. I do have to agree with you to some extent. You said at the beginning that you thought this was a really good fic, but it didn't have you feel a whole lot from it. I do have to agree. As far as
Yeah, it's sort of like that thing
tragedies,
where on a level of me being a writer,
mhm,
I can read something, I can say to myself, this is very well written on pretty much every level, but emotionally,
yeah,
I'm not feeling anything. Like I mean, like to talk about, I mean, another fic that we'll talk about later, or Vivendi.
hmm,
There were moments of that fic where my mouth just fell open. I was like, oh my god, because I loved it so much.
sure,
And this and Sombra the optometrist visits the optometrist. I mean, it's I can see everything it's doing and I can see all the moving parts and I think it's working wonderfully. But it doesn't ever have that moment where it just hits me square in the chest
yeah.
and it raises to that level of this is a fantastic, amazing fic.
And that can be difficult to hit. I mean, when you're down in the details, working with all the cogs and fitting them together, it can be hard to forget that the point of fiction in a lot of ways is to entertain people by making them feel emotions. And so like I can understand how. And just, I guess, as a suggestion, I would say what this story I think could use a little more of is a little bit more of what the stakes are to Sombra. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously he ends up mad and this and that, and that's communicated very well in a lot of ways. What it maybe doesn't do is like it doesn't show why it's a tragedy, and it's and this will come up again with
Yeah.
one of the other stories. It's like you've got conflicts, but then you also have stakes, and the stakes and the conflicts are separate, but they play into each other really strongly. I mean, you can have a conflict that's as simple as pouring out a glass of water that has stakes as high as,
Yeah.
killing tons of people. And the fact that those are similar but
Yeah.
separate need to be acknowledged. So this has got great conflict. What I wasn't feeling was the stakes as much, and it's definitely there. Like the
Yeah, I
fact
agree.
that
I agree. I agree.
he goes crazy and kills a couple ponies, like that's a really good start. Like it's not like there's nothing there. I just if the
Yeah.
author wants to deepen the emotional effect, that's what I would say they should focus on. Is they should focus on making the stakes clearer.
Yeah.
So
Because as is, yeah, it seemed like the biggest stakes we had were if Sombra wins or not wins, but accomplishes his crystal task, then he doesn't have to teach anymore, which was the biggest stakes I saw. And while that may be very high stakes for a guy who hates students but for some reason is still a professor, then that works. But when it comes to a story, it's not exactly tense enough for me.
yeah. So I mean, this is obviously a very talented author. I'm sure they can come up with something that
Yes.
works. It's just that was my read on it. Was this was good in a lot of ways. It could use a little bit higher stakes. But thank you
This
for.
was written. This was written by an author who does extremely well in the write-offs, but never publishes anything on FIM fiction, and thus has very few followers.
Hmm. Okay. Um, yeah. So thank you for writing a story for my art. I greatly enjoyed reading it in many ways. But we should probably move on to the next story now, which is The Path, and we have earmarked Quill and Hat to talk about that one.
Hello, I'm back.
Okay, I'm popping out.
All right.
I'm popping out. See you all later.
Yep. Come back in the story because next one is you and. Anyways, right.
Hey, cutie pie.
So, The Path. This is the one that Quill was reading at the last minute and having trouble getting through because Rants.
We'll get to why I was having trouble getting through it. I think after a bit of plus sides, because I want to make the author feel good before I rant.
Yes.
Looking back on this, and I've been going back over and skimming and diving in and out of bits of it while you guys have been talking about the last story. This has absolutely one of the most beautiful structures I have seen in a long time. Long-time listeners of the podcast and people who just generally know what I like to talk about know that I like structure. I like things that do interesting things with structure. I like things that play around with chronology in structure, and this story does that a lot, and that makes me happy. I
even noticed this. Like, I read the story, and I even noticed the structure. So it obviously is using it to some effect.
Yeah, it's got a really well-defined structure, which is always a good thing. I love well-defined structures. I mean, this is so well-defined. I was talking to you earlier. While I was still reading this, I was talking to Hat. And I said, I'm on the third section at the moment. I assume it's the third section of 5? And Hat went and checked, and it was of 5. Like, it's that good a structure that you can tell how many sections there are going to be without reading ahead. When you can do that, you know you've got a good structure. What that structure does for the story is a separate matter. But, I always think it's a cool thing to be able to play around with, and having a good story structure is an important part of telling a good story.
Mm-hmm. And focusing on making a specific structure is also a good way to challenge yourself as a writer. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether it'll turn out well or whether it'll turn out badly, but being experimental is oftentimes fun and interesting. So, yeah, this is also a story that dives really deep into the world building, which is always interesting to see. It does not do any half measures. And both of these things, I think, are something that possibly also introduce some issues to the story. But it is also worth pointing out that they're trying some difficult stuff, and that's admirable, I think.
Yeah, this story is genuinely, it doesn't look it at first, but it is really, really trying to do some difficult stuff. I mean, we've got whole sections that are dialogue only, which is always dangerous and always difficult to pull off well.
Yeah, and I don't know if I've ever seen, or I've rarely seen stories that do dialogue only that I thought were better because of it, which makes it one of those really kind of risky choices, in my opinion. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
But this one, I think it worked because it provided a nice balance between the two different sections, the two different stories that are going on. Well, they're really one story, just told in different orders. And that's another thing this story does that I like, which is reverse chronology.
Yeah, and I didn't actually catch on to that until the very end. So that may be something you want to look at tweaking author. Because at the end I was like, is this reverse chronology? And then I got to the very end, I was like, oh yeah, I guess it is. So, yeah.
Yeah, I am quite familiar with reverse chronology. And I picked up on it scene 3, I think.
Okay.
But that might just be because I'm really familiar with the structure.
You are, in general, a much better reader than I am.
No, I've just actually written reverse chronology before.
No, I'm pretty certain you're a better reader than me in general, because you pick up on things, and half the time I just don't.
Yeah, sometimes you pick up on stuff
that I don't get.
We get a variety of views. So yeah, I think we balance each other out.
That's good. Yeah. So this story does a lot of good and experimental things, and those are interesting. It also does a fair amount of things that are or perhaps the effects of the things that come out of those are a little not so good at times. The world building in here, there is a lot of it, and that kind of leads into one of my big complaints on it. Is I oftentimes felt rather lost, in that I wasn't sure what was going on. And this kind of ties in with what I said about the last story with stakes. I felt like the stakes in this story were extremely unclear, for a lot of the story, actually. And that was kind of a problem for me because it didn't engage me. It's like, the story has conflict pretty early on, which is a good start. Like, you need the conflict, right? But it didn't have the stakes, which makes it difficult for the person to understand why there's conflict, you know? Like I said a minute ago, the stakes and the conflict need to exist together. Because having big conflict can be good, but if you don't have any stakes for it, it's not as good. And you can have really low scale conflict with really high stakes that works much better than high scale conflict with low stakes. I don't know if that makes any sense. But I do think that was something that perhaps would help people engage with the story better earlier, is if it makes if the stakes were clearer.
Yeah. One way I've put something like this before, and I'm not entirely sure I agree with Past Me on this still, but I think it's a point worth mentioning anyway. When we're reading stories, it's a bit like literally going on a journey. You know, you've got the structure of a story is you start a journey, you go along a journey, you finish a journey. Obviously, it's a lot more nuanced than that. Really, most stories are going to somewhere and returning, but generally speaking, it involves a journey, going from one place to another. And oftentimes, when I find myself struggling to read a story, it's because I don't know where I'm going. I mean, you said earlier you felt lost while reading this. I think the point to take away from that is, if you don't know where the story seems to be headed, and it doesn't have to take a straight path to where it's heading.
Right.
It can go off on all sorts of tangents. It can do all sorts of weird and wonderful side things. But if you don't have some idea of a goal, of a final destination that the story is heading towards, even if that isn't the end of the story, even if that's just the halfway mark, if you don't have that destination in mind, it can be really hard to follow.
Or if the author's totally lying to you and it's going to twist halfway through. I mean, that's why twists work so well, is because the audience thinks one thing and then they get something else. And if they didn't have the one thing to think beforehand, it's not a twist, it's just a little random.
Precisely. Having that destination in mind is incredibly important when you're reading. And I didn't have one with this fic. This fic seemed so very focused on the journey to get to the place that it forgot to mention where we were going. Or I understand why you didn't say why we were doing it, because you wanted that to be a later reveal. Fine. But where we're going sort of needs to be stated.
And that can be a disconnect between the author and the reader sometimes too. I mean, it's sometimes very hard to tell what you need to focus on for your audience. And so maybe the author had something that they put in here that they thought would make it clear, and it just didn't, for whatever reason, you know. Conservation of the reader's attention is something I think I've mentioned before, but like the things that you need your reader to know, you need to, like, you know, put them in bold and underline them 3 times, because otherwise some of your readers are going to miss them. And yeah, it's hard to tell who's going to miss them sometimes, but if there was something in there that I missed, which is definitely possible, it just needs to be made bigger and bolder and stuff. But if there wasn't, well, I don't know.
I mean, there is definitely foreshadowing of some kinds. That's... I mean, paragraph 4, if I do not go, then the lost one will be forever in chains. But it's not obvious what that means at all when you first read it. It's just some more sort of pseudo-mystical stuff that's being said. You don't know whether this is literal, or whether it's a metaphor, or whether it's... I don't even know. Like, it could literally be describing Tyrek, for all we know.
It's true. Yeah.
So
I guess good job on the taking on the challenges, author. Hopefully, we've given you some ideas on how to what to focus on to perhaps bring it all together a little more. As a nitpick aside, all the Z names bugged me, but as I said a minute ago as well, I'm not a very close reader, and it's very possible that was perfectly fine for other people. I know I complained about Z names in one of Mono's fics a round or two ago, and like no one else was bothered by them, so it might just be me. The one other thing that I know Quill was really getting bothered about was the rhyming, and I don't know if we need to have like a full rant on it, but yeah, he wants to say something.
No, we do need. I need to get this off my chest, Hat.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Tell us about the rhyming, Quill.
So I'm going to introduce this the same way I first introduced it to Hat. There are very few things in this fandom that I truly hate. Very few things. I generally, like, even things I dislike, I tend to get on with. One of the things that really, to use a meme, grinds my gears is Zecora dialogue. Because it's so easy to do it wrong, and when you do it wrong, it stands out like a sore thumb.
To those of you who actually know anything about poetry, this didn't really get to me that badly, because I just don't do poetry,
Fair enough. Like, Zecora dialogue, right? There are two things you need to do to make it sound like not awful. And those two things are very simple. One of them is two rhyming words. Okay, we've got that. We're almost always sorted on that in this fic. There are a couple of iffy rhymes, but for the most part, the rhymes are strong. The rhymes work. That said, I do want to quickly aside, when you're picking rhymes for something like this, for dealing with a character who speaks in rhyming couplets and things like that, generally good idea to pick words that don't sound like you're literally putting them in there to make sure they rhyme.
Okay.
If you had to look this up on Rhyme Dictionary or whatever, then it's probably not a good idea.
Well, I was actually going to just suggest a Rhyme Dictionary because it is worth looking at those things sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah, but
it's better to have things that actually rhyme.
I agree. It's definitely worth. I was probably exaggerating for effect there.
Yeah.
It is worth using things like Rhyme Dictionary occasionally, but it's also worth noting that if you do have to look up a rhyme, then you're probably trying to force your sentence to fit around it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to point out, because I have very little experience actually writing rhyming poems, but the one poem I did write, I used a rhyming dictionary. And one thing I occasionally had to do was change the first word to just get a different rhyme, because my thought was I would put down a word and then I'd look up a word that rhymed with it, and if I didn't find anything that sounded good, I would change the first word, because these are couplets, whatnot. They don't have to have a larger structure. You can refactor the entire rhyme.
Yeah, this isn't like.
So if you put like one word down and there's no word that rhymes with it that sounds good, pick a different one for your first half of the rhyme. It's definitely doable, and it can help remove some of that stiltedness.
Yeah, generally just try to avoid forcing your sentences to fit the rhymes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that.
That's my advice on rhyming. But the other thing you need to do for Zecora dialogue and for rhyming couplets in general, and this is the thing that bugged me in this story and in so many other stories, it's rhythm.
Well,
you might
oftentimes called meter. Is Zecora actually properly metered?
I don't think she's metered in the show in that she has a consistent meter between lines.
Okay.
But rhyming couplets in general, you want to have them match as closely as possible in meter to each other. You don't have to keep the same meter between pairs of rhyming couplets. That doesn't matter at all. But if one of your lines in the rhyming couplet is like 3 syllables long, and the other one is 17 syllables long, and I'm exaggerating for effect here, but you get the gist.
Okay.
It doesn't feel like a couplet. It feels like you've got a midline rhyme.
So Arthur, here's my tip on that, which I used last time I was trying to write rhymes. Is I counted the syllables on my fingers, because
Yeah.
actual meter can be really hard to do because you have to have the stress and the slacks in the right spot. Our words have stresses on them. We put the emphasis on a certain syllable, or if you rearrange the stresses, we put the emphasis on a different syllable. Um, as a simple demonstration of how our words are stressed. But if you count on your fingers, you will at least get the amount of syllables right. Whether or not the stress is in the right place, you'll at least get the amount of syllables right. And that's not too hard to do. So I would say, if you don't want to bother with meter, then don't bother with meter. But just, count on your fingers and get about the same amount of syllables. It'll make Quill a lot happier.
Yeah, I mean, this is dialogue. At the end of the day, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect rhyming couplets, okay? But it has. There are some things you have to try and get roughly right. When I'm writing serious metered and rhyming poetry, I will triple check every line with my fingers. That's not like an amateur first time poety sort of thing. That's something you just do every time to make sure you've got it right.
Okay. Sure.
Like Fenton says in the comments, even the best poets count on their fingers. It is poetry 101. That's how you start. And you have to apply that kind of thinking when you're writing rhyming couplet dialogue.
And if you're at the start, that's perfectly fine too. I don't write much poetry. I don't read much poetry. This really didn't bother me that much. The people who get really out about it are going to be fairly rare. Yeah.
Hello.
And it's not they're wrong, but yeah, it's great we have Quill here because he knows things that I don't know, but I'm just point out that not everyone is Quill. So, yeah. So if you covered most everything you wanted to rant about.
Another thing to very quickly point out: when you're getting similar numbers of syllables but not quite the same number of syllables, generally speaking, matching stress patterns is slightly more important. You can get away with adding in a syllable or two, or taking out a syllable or two between lines a lot easier if you try and match the number of stressed syllables, or if you try and match where the stressed syllables fall between the lines as best as you can. Generally speaking, that's gonna sound a lot better, especially when read out loud, but that's going to sound a lot better as natural rhyming couplets than matching the same number of syllables but having completely different stress schemes.
Yeah. I mean, I'll take your word for it, Quill, but quite honestly, I can't meter to save my life half the time, so...
Fair enough. It's
Count
just
on your
a
fingers
suggestion.
will get you 80% of the way there. If you can be bothered to learn meter, if you've got the ear for it, I honestly just half the time I think I don't have the ear for it or something.
Meter is for actual nerds.
Okay.
Like me.
But yeah, counting on your fingers will get you.
It'll definitely get you in the right direction, because there are some places in this story particularly, but also in a lot of other stories I've read with Sakura. Author, you're not alone in this issue. This is just general advice for everyone listening to the podcast.
Yes.
Please count on your fingers. Once you've got that down, please just try and tap out stresses on your desk or something. I don't know. Just work on this. Thank you.
Okay, so Poetry 101 with Quill. Professor
Dear
Quill.
Pony fandom,
Yeah.
write
But,
Sakura better. Goodbye.
Have we covered most everything about this one? I think maybe we should move on.
Yeah, just to summarize this, I actually didn't hate this as much as my ranting makes it sound like I did.
Yeah. It's just poetry rant in general, right? So,
yeah, it's very interesting with what it tries to do structurally, and it's just I'm really bad at trying to find the words I'm looking for. It clearly shows that the author has not only some skill, but is trying to better themselves. They're pushing themselves with this story, and I think that's great.
Yeah, good on you for taking on the challenges. I think you need to raise the stakes sooner. Clean up the idea fuzz a little if you can. Work on your rhymes a bit. But yeah, all in all, pretty good. So maybe we should move on to Ars Vivendi, which is Quill and Dubs.
That took 20 minutes.
Sorry.
Sorry, I'll edit it down.
You could have jumped in and been like, I'm going to be the guy moving things along now, and then I could have made a joke about you saying that to me. And anyways, I'll mute myself.
Yeah, but I hate it when you interrupt me, so I decided I wasn't going to do it to you.
Okay.
I do actually want to say quickly though something about optometrist that I forgot to say the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Author, you run a little bit of a risk of people thinking that Sombra's first trip to the optometrist can come across as a little bit contrived, just because the idea of Sombra having any sort of poor eyesight is never really brought up beforehand. Sparkle just randomly says, if you're going to work with me, you need to have perfect eyesight, go to the optometrist, and then he goes. So if there was some reason that we saw for her to say that, like, for example, maybe he like tripped over something in the dark while they were in the cave, then I think that would work better.
Mention the vision polishing spell sooner, because it's a spell he apparently uses every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah. Ars Vivendi.
No balloons. Okay, Ars Vivendi. Yeah, I love this story. It's currently sitting at the top of my slate. Have you read it, Quill?
Yes, I have read the stories that I've been told to read this round. Yeah, I read this. I enjoyed it. It took me a little while to get into, though, I'll be honest. I didn't find the opening as effective as it could have been.
Yeah, I thought that it was very funny. I thought the opening, actually, I thought the opening was very good. It was not at all what I was expecting it to be. I mean, I had read a story recently called called Best Friends by the author Brony Writer, and what that's about is about Rarity accidentally killing someone and then having to convince her friends to help her hide the body. And so that's what I thought this was going to be about, just in the way that you have this accidental death, and Octavia is very kind of casual about it. But it quickly took that shift into something I had mentioned earlier, Octavia having contact with someone who is dead or death in a sense.
Yeah, the opening did feel a bit out of touch with the rest of the story, but not in a bad way. I agree. I did feel like when it started, I didn't quite know where it was going, but I certainly didn't expect it to go where it did from that opening.
Octavia is very British.
She almost always is. Let's be honest. That's just how this fandom does Octavia. One thing I want to mention very quickly, just before we get started on actually talking about the story itself. Did you find the asides in this story a little jarring?
Which kind of asides?
Particularly during Octavia narration, we had just in the first couple of paragraphs, she hadn't meant for it to happen, of course. Blah blah blah. Even now, not she had admittedly. It was just that. I mean, as an Earth Pony, it's kind of a necessary one. But next paragraph, of course, even then, we've got a lot of these little asides coming in and interrupting and slowing down the text a little bit.
I had no problem with them.
Okay. It might just be me. I found them very weird.
I really didn't. I mean, at the very least, they didn't jar me enough for me to even notice them. However, you are right. He uses or he or she, whoever wrote this, uses the phrase "of course" quite a few times.
I mean, just these little interruptions coming in. I mean, it might just be me, but I felt they were just a little too densely in there in the first few paragraphs.
I can see that. Personally, they did not take me out of my zone. The one comment I did have was the Pale Trotter. I wasn't entirely sure if people would agree with me on this, but I couldn't help but at times his voicing felt a little bit too not lighthearted, but too normal, like he was just like any other pony. When I think of this character, this sort of like Grim Reaper type character, I don't think of him as talking using the same kind of very calm, very casual tone of voice that everyone else does. I don't know. That might just be me.
No, I can see the same kind of thing. I was reading a piece today actually comparing death voicings in different particularly famous stories with death voicings and death characterization, and it was interesting to see how they were dealt with. And I think this story does it in a very interesting way. Not a particularly It took me a while to actually, very oddly, it took me a couple of lines to twig that this was actually a Grim Reaper. I genuinely was like, oh, this is just some kind of dark magic-y thing, but it could be anything to begin with. I honestly didn't get that for a few lines of dialogue. I don't think that's a bad thing, though.
When it said hooded pony skull, and it was just after Vinyl had died, I sort of made the connection.
It was one of my interpretations, but I was kind of keeping open this other interpretation that maybe Octavia was just practicing necromancy.
Yeah.
This is like some hooded skull familiar she's got or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, I guess I'm trying to think about how to better phrase what I'm trying to say here. And part of it may just be like the Pale Trotter doesn't feel like a unique character in a sense. Like he doesn't have enough of a character on his own. Like he's just sort of, like I had mentioned earlier, using OCs to and they just feel kind of flat. Like they're there to service the plot. They have a very kind of stock personality with no sort of flavor. And that might be sort of what I'm feeling from Pale Trotter here. Just that I mean, obviously he is there to sort of push forward the plot and sort of provides a little bit of exposition. And the way he does it is that he just kind of talks like a normal person. He does, aside from the fact that he's a Grim Reaper, he doesn't really have any sort of idiosyncrasies in the way he acts.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing to note is there's that one paragraph really near the end where the Pale Trotter talks about what his job is.
Yeah.
And and how he approaches his job and what he does. And I think that paragraph is pretty much the only opportunity we get to actually look into the character of the Pale Trotter in this piece. And my issue with it is that as a take on death, it's not doing much new. Death has been characterized a lot over the years, and this is pretty just standard. That paragraph feels like, where it comes in the story, feels like it should be bringing something fresh to the scene. And while it brings something fresh for Vinyl, it doesn't bring anything fresh for the readers.
I agree. Yes. What else did I have to say? The idea of how Vinyl got this curse, I wasn't clear about.
No, neither was I, actually.
Yeah, they explain it very quickly, I think, at the very start. Let me see. I can't find it right now.
Is it to do with this getting Octavia out of Tartarus?
Yeah, okay, something like
paragraph of dialogue exposition.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess I just didn't I wasn't entirely clear about how we got to this point, and eventually it just when I got to the end, I mean, it didn't totally throw me out of the piece, but I couldn't help but get that nagging feeling in the back of my head, like, okay, why is this like this? And I wasn't sure about that.
Yeah, that said, I've seen similar complaints be raised about other stories in the past. And
when you say that, do you mean in this round,
like
or
just in general, like not just write-offs, just on film fiction, on fan fiction sites in general. I've seen the complaint of, I didn't quite get where this, like, what the backstory behind this was. And in this case, I agree. I didn't get it. It didn't jar me out all that much, but it was sort of nagging in the back of my mind. But I don't think that's a huge, major problem to this piece in the way it can be in other cases. Like, sometimes it can be the author has left out a detail that's really important for understanding what on earth is going on.
Yeah.
In this case, it's more like, you know, the author has deliberately chosen to skim over a detail that isn't actually that important. Like, how we got to this state is nowhere near as important to the story as how we're dealing with this state. And I quite often see that complaint, and in this case, I agree. I don't think it is a complaint worth bringing up, but I don't think it's a huge issue. But when people do make a huge issue out of it, I'm often sitting there going, well, actually, is that really the point of this story? Does this story really need that kind kind of emphasis. I don't know why I'm saying this. I'm just saying this to sort of defend the story against not
Saying
criticism.
this to shame me, Quill.
I actually had something I thought a note about this story that I'd like to bring up because I don't think either of you have touched on it. Do you feel like the emotional arc for this story is kind of reversed? Like, it seemed to me after reading this that Death is the character who gets the emotional arc.
In a sense, I guess.
And I was like, I really didn't think Death was the main character, but the way it's written, like, Vinyl and Octavia, like, not a whole lot really changes for them over the course of the entire story.
Well, I think by the end the whole point is that like things haven't changed. Like Death is begging Vinyl to just finally accept her fate and go to hell.
Except he doesn't. At the end of the story, he's the one who changes.
Yeah, I know.
So I don't know. I felt that was kind of backwards, or weird somehow.
If that's true, I mean, I guess if that's what the author was going for, I suppose, then I think that doubles my comment about how Death needs more to him.
Okay. I just thought I brought that up because I didn't think either of you had mentioned it. So.
Hat, get out of our session.
Okay, fine. Just don't take it.
So I think this... I mean, that's a really interesting point to make. It sort of brings me back to what I was saying earlier and some stuff I've been reading up on recently on story structure. Which was earlier I was talking about the idea of quite often stories are about going somewhere and then coming back. And when I say quite often, I mean pretty much every story ever written, with the exception of some like particularly experimentally structured ones. They're all about going somewhere and coming back, either metaphorically or literally, whatever. And the important aspect is when you come back, you change something.
Yeah.
And in this case, identifying what it is that's changed, I'm struggling to do. Something has changed. It feels like they've made peace with something for Vinyl and Octavia. I feel like that's the emotional arc that's being hinted at here. But I can't find enough suggestion at the start that there was ever anything to make peace with.
Well, I think what the point is that Vinyl feels like because of her constant dying, she's become a burden on Octavia, and Octavia doesn't. And she, it's kind of like, what's that phrase? If you love something, set it free.
Yeah.
It's that idea of, if I really love Octavia, why am I reducing her life to just cleaning up my guts off the floor? And so she has that moment near the middle when she's talking to Pale Trotter where she starts to think, okay, maybe I should finally just let go and let her live her life, because if she's spending all her time just cleaning up after me, is that really living? Is that really even a romance? And by the end, she has, when Pale Trotter tells her, Octavia does want you, she has that realization that their love is more than just, an obligation to clean up after my death. I'm not a burden on her. I'm someone that she wants around for a reason. She wouldn't keep cleaning up after me if she didn't want me to be here.
Agreed. But can I take a moment to point out a slight structural weakness to this story? Which is that those ideas are themselves put into Vinyl's head by the Pale Trotter.
Yeah.
This story, if you literally reduce this story down to bullet points, we introduce the whole idea of Vinyl coming back to life. Then we have the Pale Trotter trying to convince her to move on by pointing out that she's a burden to Octavia.
Yeah.
Then she comes to accept that idea. Then the Pale Trotter shows up and goes, well, actually, no, you're not a burden to Octavia. I was like, wait, what? But you just said, but what? Structurally, that feels weird.
I can deal with that last part with the Pale Trotter revealing that she's not the burden, just because the Pale Trotter does have knowledge, assumedly, that Vinyl doesn't. But I agree that I think Vinyl does need to have more agency in her motivations.
Yeah, it is like Had is saying, in this case, that change only really makes sense if you're interpreting this as the Pale Trotter having the emotional arc.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, multiple characters can have emotional arcs in a story. It just gets very confusing very quickly.
Yeah.
Especially in a short story like this.
I will say that the two moments in this when Vinyl dies, both her snapping her neck on the shower floor and being crushed by the stage light at the end, were both my favorite parts of the piece. Just because of how just in a structural level, how well done they were, and that they happen at the very end of sentences, at the very end of scenes, and so it leaves you with that lasting impact, and you don't necessarily see it coming.
Yeah, no, agreed. They were really, really well done, both of them. I mean, we've been heaping complaints on this week. This is something we seem to be doing a lot this particular round. We're heaping a lot of complaints on things that are good. This is good. I liked this.
Well,
Let's
I
end on that.
mean, the more you love something, the more you criticize it, because you just want to see it be perfect.
Yeah, something like that.
I realized you said she gets crushed by a light at the end. One of my notes here says the payoff in the end is very ... light.
Oh, I don't agree.
That was okay. So I just thought that was funny. And people are welcome to draw their own conclusions about it. I'm not discussing the story, remember? So
why are you here?
Well, I'm here to say maybe we should move on to the color of the stars.
God damn. Okay, fine.
So unless you guys have more to say about this story, like I don't want to stop you if you legitimately have more to say, but like I kind of felt like you were winding down a bit.
I don't think I have a tremendous amount else. Writer, I thought this was really great. I like Vinyl dying. Yeah, 'twas cool. Make the Pale Trotter a more complex character, and give Vinyl more agency in her motivation.
There you go. You heard it from Dubs. All right, and the color of the stars.
Okay, the first thing I want to say about this is a direct message to Novel Idea, the user, because Novel Idea in the chat a few days ago we were discussing the concept of hard versus short scene, or hard versus soft scene breaks.
Okay.
And Novel wasn't entirely sure what the difference was and how you would use them. I'd like to say that I think this piece is a very good example of how to use them. Mostly in that the way we see them about 3 or 4 times, and out of 3 of those times, the way we see them used is it's a transition from Starlight's dreams to the present. And so I think that's a very good use of hard scene breaks, because it's just a shift in mind state. It's a shift in consciousness. It's not a shift in location or time. While at the same time, you see hard scene breaks, and those are signs that Twilight and Starlight are, in a new part of town, or are, hours have passed. So I think that if you are looking for an example of how to do hard, it's also an example. It signals a shift in topic. So they're focusing on figuring out this spell now, but now we have a hard scene break. So now they're focusing on it. Now it's Starlight's dream. So I think that if you are looking for examples of how to use hard versus soft scene breaks, this is not the worst place you could start.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that, but now that you bring it up, the fact that I didn't even notice that means they were used very well.
Yeah.
Like it seemed like a natural flow to me. So yeah, that was good work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do like that this was a twist.
Yeah.
I thought that was very well done. The fact that this is, Chrysalis sending a message, and it's like, oh no, I thought she was going to like trick Starlight somehow, because it was fairly obvious once the spell had come up and she started monologuing. I thought it was, either Chrysalis had set a deeper trap, which would have been cool too, or Starlight was the one sending the message or something like that. But I thought it was pretty neat to twist it back and have once again Chrysalis be the one sending the message.
I couldn't help but wonder at the end how the hell time travel leads to being able to hack into someone's dreams. But that might just be me nitpicking again.
Yeah, I mean the one book had something to do with stars, which in My Little Pony is fairly closely tied to dreams. So I mean, I didn't think it was too out there.
Speaking of that, I'll talk a little bit about characterization in a few minutes. But I couldn't help but when it got to the point where Starlight asked Twilight, "Do you recognize the title of this, the Star Atlas book?" And Twilight said, like, vaguely. I was like, There is no way that Twilight knows about this damn book. She loves stars. Of course, she's gonna know about this book.
Okay, yeah, that's a fair enough point. I mean, it could have been a really rare book, but that might just make it more
I mean,
likely for her to know
it's
about it. I
it's
don't know.
it's apparently popular enough that multiple editions of it have been published,
Yeah,
and there's still
sure.
first edition versions around.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, so I mean, I guess that's depends on how each person deals with Twilight's character in their own head.
That
But
author is
I
what
could
we
see
call
how that would.
nitpicking.
An excellent example, Dubs. An excellent example.
And now we see the difference between hard nitpicking and soft nitpicking.
Man, I got about halfway through this, and my only thought that something is just stuck out to me. Like, okay, it wasn't halfway through. It was the part where Twilight scans Starlight Glimmer with the changeling detection spell.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, does it matter?
Oh God.
Which, like, I don't know. Maybe that's not. Maybe that was just me. But I was like,
My reaction to that was not JAP Jaxie or whatever his name is. My reaction to that was more kind of like, wow, Twilight, dick move. Like, you could at least do it when like Starlight's back was turned or something. Like, if you're gonna suspect your friends of terrorism, keep it to yourself for a little while.
sure. So, what did you think of all the like Glimlight fluff that was in here?
Oh
'Cause
yeah, that was
there was
weird.
definitely a lot of Glimlight fluff in here, and it never really seems to go anywhere.
Yeah, no. Well, the thing is, for me, is that was really strong at the beginning, like
Yeah.
with the whole thing about Twilight touches her, Starlight blushes at one point. It's like, did she
comes in
linger on the
several
word
times, yeah.
friends? Yeah. But
When they're
then as
riding
it
in
went,
the train.
yeah, but then as it went on and it got further into like the plot and like the action going on, it basically like straight up disappeared. And I was wondering where what was going on there.
I didn't feel like it totally disappeared.
Well,
I
I didn't
do feel
notice
like
it
it.
at the very
I do feel like it never actually got a resolution. Like I felt like it
yeah.
was just kind of in there, and it didn't never really went anywhere with it. So whether
Well,
it totally disappeared or not, I do agree with you. It disappeared at the end of the story. It never got a resolution, in my opinion.
interestingly, I mean, as someone who writes romance, and I like to think that hopefully I know at least some things about it, I actually thought that once those very overt signs disappeared, the blushing, the accidentally touching each other, yada yada yada, it became a much more compelling shipfic, just because it got away from those kind of cliched, sexual tension. Does she
Right.
want me or does she not? And it got more into, these are two characters that are friends and they have a lot of chemistry together.
Okay. Fair enough.
So I thought it worked a lot better that way. I mean, certainly physical intimacy does have a place, but that emotional intimacy, I think, especially when it comes to Twilight and Starlight, is a lot better.
So what did you think about this fic opening both on a dream sequence and on a fight scene?
I had no problem with it.
Really?
I mean, I really didn't.
Okay.
I mean, I guess the beginning, I can see why some people would find the beginning a little bit dense to get through, mostly because it is just sort of like, a lot of it is like description of like how Starlight is going to counter this attack and
Right.
yada yada
Yeah,
yada.
I was going to give the author a little advice on fight scenes here in general. Not that I
Yeah.
know anything specific, but a lot of the fight scenes, and there's like three or four fight scenes in here, and like three of them are the dream. They're basically
Yeah.
similar to the others. There's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't actually tie into the plot in any way. The one thing that does, and it kind of surprised me that it did, was Cavendish's greater grounding spell. Like that's the one bit of those fights. It was the two important messages that were being sent back in the dreams. It turns out was the changeling thing, which kind of had her looking for changelings around and spot Chrysalis. And the Cavendish's greater grounding, which is how she actually survived it. Those are the important parts. And a lot of the rest of those fights it's not actually doing a lot for you. It can be cut. But if you do want to keep them, try to break up your paragraphs a little more. Because the very first fight scene especially has got one really big paragraph right in the middle of it. And there's like 4 or 5 things that happen in that paragraph, and it's kind of hard to
Yeah.
follow them all through. So try to break up your paragraphs a little more. When things are happening very quickly, you can make your sentences shorter to kind of signify that stuff is happening quickly, which can sometimes work. It's not always the best idea, but it can sometimes work. Help you give more of like a frenetic feeling to the text. Things like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I suck at fight scenes, so listen to that. He's cute.
Yeah, you can't listen to me being cute though, because anyways, as far as nitpicking go, that Cavendish's greater grounding actually bugged me because I felt like Chrysalis inventing a spell and then naming it after someone else was never going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I realize you don't have a whole lot of choice there because otherwise you're tipping your hand really hard, but yeah, that kind of rung hollow to me. One other thing I've got in my notes here, the very last line of this fic is, now we're going to be merciful, or now we're going to be kind, or something like that. Did you feel like that was signifying they were going to kill Chrysalis?
No, not at all.
Really? Because I got to the end, I'm like,
opposite.
So is this a mercy killing now? Like,
I thought
because it has her like
opposite.
tied up and bleeding, right? I was like, so now she's in all this pain. Are they just gonna put her out of her misery?
No, because earlier, Starlight is the one who suggests that they kill Chrysalis.
Okay.
And so I thought that was signaling a change, and that she sees that even this evil creature can have regrets and can have real feelings aside from evil. And so when Chrysalis gives her that final request, do what you want with me, but please be kind. I thought that was a shift in her character from Glim Glam wanting to straight up kill her to Glim Glam, wanting to quote unquote be kind, and not totally obliterate someone who still has the potential to have a good future.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. I guess just I was a little unsure about that when I got there, so that might need a little more love and care.
I mean, my unsurety.
Just me not writing.
My unsurety from that comes from. I mean, I just offered that evidence. She says earlier, kill her.
Sure.
But even then, that's a little bit, considering that this is the final line of the piece. And it is. I mean, final lines are important, and I would assume that this is meant to be an important theme in the piece. That idea of mercy versus revenge, I guess, isn't important enough for me. It's not as emphasized as it could be.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I guess that's about all I had here in my notes.
Oh, I mean, something I had mentioned earlier was characterization.
Sure.
I thought the characterization of this piece was lovely. Starlight Glimmer, first of all. I've always had sort of a weird relationship with Starlight Glimmer, mostly because that was when originally I stopped watching the show as much, and I don't think I've ever really read a fic with her in it. I mean, I've written one. I don't think I ever really read one with her in it. But my characterization of Starlight is basically, she's very smart, she's very, talented, very driven, but she's also really independent. She kind of has her head stuck up in her own ass, and she's very stubborn. And I thought that this really, really did her justice. If you go to the very, very beginning of the piece, just the way it starts with that whole spiel about control, about how control is like the one thing ponies have, it's the most important part of you. That's such a Starlight thing. That so if you were to ask like Twilight or something, she'd be like, oh, love is what you have, friendships, yada yada yada. But Starlight says control. It's that power, because that's what Starlight's all about. She's all about using her power to make things better.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess the one bit about characterization that stuck out to me was when they actually confront Chrysalis. And Chrysalis, she starts out asking questions, but then she doesn't actually listen for any answers, which, okay, that is probably actually in character with Chrysalis, But at some point I was like, I mean, my thought was this person is crazy, and then my second thought was, well, that's right. Chrysalis is literally crazy, So it's not actually a problem. But that was the one thing about characterization that kind of got me.
To be fair, I mean, her first question is just like, how did you find me? Which I think is a pretty suitable thing. And you're not, and if you really do feel like this person has come to like finally destroy you, like Chrysalis probably does, then you probably aren't going to wait for them to answer.
I mean, in all honesty, though, if that was true, she should have just attacked without asking how they found her, right? Like if.
Yeah, but it's just a surprise thing. Like you see someone, you're like, you're like, how the hell did you get here?
Fair enough. I don't know.
Oh, and so I going on with characterization. I thought that Chrysalis was. I mean, I guess I can guess. Now that we talk about it, I can kind of say what you mean with that. But in general, I thought that Chrysalis was very well done, especially in that line where she talks about, I set up 2 traps for you. I thought that was very funny, and I thought that was an example because so many fic writers, just because Chrysalis has been beaten so many times in the show, they like to make her kind of like a buffoon.
Yeah.
But I mean, she managed to take over an entire damn kingdom twice
Okay,
basically by herself, because all she has is those stupid drones. So obviously she's quite smart, she's quite cunning, and I thought this was a very good example of that.
Yeah.
Twilight, I also thought was very good, mostly in just she does have. I mean, aside from that one moment where she does sort of scan her friend, which was a little bit dickish.
But Twilight could do that sort of thing, honestly.
Yeah,
like she doesn't always think through the social implications of stuff.
Yeah, that's very true. She can be kind of oblivious, especially when she does sort of like try to brush it off, like, oh, can you blame me? Like, yeah, right. Twilight. So there's a moment near in the middle when they get to the library, and she starts comparing like late fees with the librarian,
right?
Which I thought was very cute, and it was very much in character. I always wanted to read more fics about Twilight as a librarian.
Yeah.
Just because of, I mean, that was basically her role for like however many years, 4 years. She probably has like a degree in library science. I love that. I thought her kindness was very nice. Her reluctance to kill Chrysalis when Starlight wanted to. I thought that was very well done. I thought that honestly, I mean, aside from those very few nitpicks I mentioned, I thought this piece was especially with Starlight, was like a masterclass in voicing and characterization.
So, good job on the characterization, author. I guess, I would just urge you tighten up your structure a little bit with those dreams, maybe.
What the hell does the title mean?
The color of the stars. Yeah, I didn't get that either. I couldn't tell you.
Maybe they're all redshifting. Haha. Astronomy joke.
Maybe the stars are purple because you're staring at Twilight.
Because you're staring at Twilight's ass?
Oh, actually, it did say something about... Fenton says stars are used to get back to the past. I think the cover, or the title of that book had something about silver in it.
Yeah.
So that might be it. I don't know, but... Anyways.
Well, I'd like to give my final comments. So Hereafter, very good fic. However, it was missing one quotation mark, which means I have to give it a 0 out of 10. Optometrist, there was a broken italics tag at one point, so 0 out of 10. Ars Vivendi, fantastic fic, fantastic. However, they misspelled bucket at one point, so 0 out of 10. And Color of the Stars, masterclass in characterization. However, at one point they repeated the word wings twice, so 0 out of 10.
There you have it, folks. 0 out of 10s across the board from our guest speaker, Dubs Rewatcher. Thank you for joining us, Dubs. This has been Radio Writeoff on the new art round. Signing off.
You should all be ashamed of yourself. I'm Dubs Rewatcher.